question. How to
I feel like that song belongs at like the opening of a basketball game when the team comes running out. That's how I look at it. Like, let's go. All right. Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, February 11th. Welcome to the Torque web stream for the week. I've got a wonderful panel here. And it's great to see. I see Michael's here, Roxy's here, Richard's already dropping in. We are on the Torque platforms. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn. Drop a hello in the chat. Say hi to everybody. I am so honored to have such amazing folks on my panel today. We've got Marino and Pradumna, and Heather should be showing up. I haven't heard a message yet, but she might be running late, so hopefully she'll be here in a second. But I wanted to give brief introductions brought to you by Grok for my panel today. I thought that would be kind of fun. We'll start with Marino. Is a Canadian network engineer now serving as a staff solutions architect at Kong Inc., known for his deep dives into Kubernetes, service mesh, and the foundational importance of networking in tech. He's famous. You're famous, Marino. Congratulations. For his hair. It didn't say that. I added that. For his community engagement through developer relations, streaming sessions, and his humorous yet insightful takes on tech, like his love-hate relationship for YAML. How accurate?
that is like pretty much 100% spot on. And what happened to Pradumna?
I don't know. He apparently he didn't like it. He's like, you know what? I'm offended by this hair talk. He's the one that brought it up though backstage. He's like, you have such good hair. He said
I
that.
do. I remember.
Well, I'm going to read his anyways. Hopefully, he hears the recording later. He is a Docker captain and DevOps expert who excels in simplifying complex tech, promoting open source collab, providing valuable insights on Golang and AI. He's recognized for his significant contributions to the tech community and education. Did you catch the tail end of that? That was you. And great hair. Grok didn't put that. I added that for you because I think you do as well. We've got people chiming in. Andrew Beard, Marino, you got all the hairs, man. All the hairs are on point. Oh, well, it's great to have you guys. Hopefully, Heather pops in shortly here, but let's get into it. We want to talk about DevOps today, and I think it's an important thing to talk about because I think that there's a lot of maybe misnomers or maybe a little bit of an even kind of gray area as to what the hell it even means. So let's just start from the top. First question that I had, I mean, for me at least, is how do you explain DevOps to somebody who is completely new to the field? Like just totally evergreen. What are we talking about here? What is DevOps? Who? Oh, don't everybody jump at once, guys.
I think you should take that, Pradumna. I'll fill in afterwards.
Yeah, so I think Marina explained this very well in a Twitter space, I remember. So I would say there was a problem between like the I will keep it very simple, like developer and operations team. So like dev team were not able to like develop very well, and there was a huge issue with the operations. So like let's so that dev team can focus more on the development and operation teams can more focus on the operations. So there's a like intersection of kind of role like fits between that. So it's handling everything for the like creating like infinity kind of thing you have seen like that. So from like code to production, so everything is like automated process with some kind of tooling. And this is like we heard about this DevOps rule. DevOps terminology is more like a practice. It's more like a people also call it jargon as well, but yeah, it's more like a set of practices which you follow in your organization to like automate tasks kind of stuff. So yeah, this is in very general, I would say. Yeah.
You want to add to that, Marino?
Yeah. So a long time ago, and this is just to play on what Pradumna said, there was a lot of siloing. It still happens today where you've got different teams operating on their own. Some are just trying to build. Others are trying to deploy. And there's no conversations that happen in between. And so what you end up having is a situation where applications end up moving into production environments without all the right guardrails in place, all the right practices in place. And then something goes wrong, and then we have a situation of blame oops or blame ops, if you want, because finger pointing happens. So the idea of what DevOps is supposed to be is building out a blameless culture where it's not so much about people, like people causing problems. It's about the process that's broken that needs to be addressed and fixed. And so many years ago, Google came out with this methodology for site reliability engineering. And that's just a bunch of people that basically do DevOps. SREs are the ones that come up and implement various technologies, practices, collaboration to be able to achieve that marriage of dev and ops. So now when a developer needs to publish something to production, there's a proper collaboration going on between all of these different teams so that when it does go out to production, things just don't break. Things don't break other things. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards this ideology that DevOps is a set of technologies. Technology is one thing. In fact, we do a lot of DevOps. We did a lot of DevOps way back, probably about 10, 15 years ago. I think technology, though, has really brought out what DevOps means in the last 5 to 10 years.
All right. I think you kind of touched on it there, where maybe it's getting associated with like with tooling or specific things like that, but it really is a lot more ambiguous than that. That's interesting. I guess maybe let's talk a little bit about both of your journeys into the field specifically of DevOps. Is what were your individual paths, and maybe what were like some things and skills from your past roles that really helped you? Because again, looking into DevOps, people that already have a lot of transferable skills may be more qualified than they think they are. Go ahead, Marino. You start with that one.
Yeah. So a long time ago, I used to be that tech support guy. I still kind of am. I mean, depending on who you ask. But tech support really came in the form of I need something or I need to solve a problem. Can you go fix it or can you make it happen? And that would happen through the form of tickets being opened and then being assigned to me. So I just go action it. But as I started to really go down that path, I began to realize that what was going on here was people were making requests. They needed to be unblocked somehow. They needed to be able to move forward somehow. And so they would come to me to give them that ability to be unblocked, right? So I'd present them with some sort of something. Here's a good example. The developer says, I need to build code and I need to deploy it somewhere and test it. But I feel like you don't have enough space for me to test it. So can you buy me a server? So that would be an indication for me to go out and talk to a bunch of vendors and say, hey, can you give me some quotes on some servers so that I can buy it and then, rack and stack it, deploy it, install an operating system, and then make it available to this developer here who wants to just build on top. The reality, though, is that the ideology behind DevOps is to just speed up things. So I can't be doing that every single time, especially today, because guess what? It takes like 2-3 weeks to even get a server in your doorstep. Actually, you can go on Amazon or one of these other like server computer places and you'll get a server in like no time. But there's another side to it too. There's the readiness component of it. How ready is it for it to be able to be utilized? And then in order to repeat that process over again, I don't want to be sitting there clicking the same damn thing over and over and over again. So we need to automate. So automation really started to shine probably about 15 years ago, where folks were automating infrastructure, being able to provision with infrastructure as code tooling so that we wouldn't have to sit there and keep doing the same thing, like installing an operating system, patching it, and then making it available on the network. All of those things would just be automated. But then something else happened too. Wastage. We'd have all of these servers that were like maybe utilized for about, 20% of the time and only utilized 10%. and then you have all of this idle capacity. And so there was another ideology of basically making things much more efficient. And so this notion of virtualization came up, and containerization came about to be able to build things, be a lot more efficient, stack things across like a smaller set of servers, because that means less operational overhead, and then still automate it all. So you put it all together, and now you have this full system that someone requests a server. They don't need to know that it's physical or virtual or a container, but they'll get access to it to be able to deploy their code. And that just became a life cycle. But over time, like, we learned so much more. Like, I'll stop there, but that was pretty much my journey. And then I bounced around a bit.
Wow. Okay, you said a couple things there that I want to touch on, especially with the automation and environmental impact too. I kind of want to ask a few questions about that too, but let's go over to Pradumna. Did you want to walk us down your path a little bit?
Yeah, this is a quite interesting question because you ask specifically like might be people are into like kind of DevOps, but they are not knowing that. So yeah, it happens. Like for example, you run GitHub Actions, correct? You use Bash command, you use Linux. There's also like basic prerequisite or like a lot of things we do on the DevOps, like when we automate stuff, build containers, doing the deployments. These are the like the servers, Linux server we are deploying on using the Bash scripts or using the Bash command. So what happened with me, like I was developing something and interesting thing happened, like the software which I was trying to run a database which was not like possible on the system. So I was trying to figure out things. Then I came to know about, okay, so there is something called Docker, which you can install and run anything on that system. So this is how I got to introduce with the Docker. So then I started running that database and started using the application. And slowly I get to know, okay, there are some other toolings as well. And slowly I started becoming like, okay, already use GitHub Actions. I already use Bash scripts. I already use Bash. I started using Docker. It's a very set of tools starting to like scattered around and like creating a basket of that. And everything started falling into that. So then I realized, okay, there is a proper set of path that time I didn't know like DevOps exists. So then I started exploring more, and then now after that Docker thing, when I completed with the application development, I completely like switched to this domain, like going much more deep, like learning Kubernetes, Terraform, infrastructure code tools. So yeah, that's for my journey. So yeah, it was
Nice.
just like start with a Docker, and I continued with that. So yeah.
So it was all Docker's fault. It was basically that was the gateway to DevOps for you. I like that. Um, and you mentioned Docker, and Marino, you had mentioned a couple tools as well. If someone's transitioning into like or considering DevOps today, what are maybe some of the specifics that they should learn first? Is there like a go-to thing like Docker? Docker seemed to be a great entryway for Pradumna. Is that? Oh, I see a head shake there for Marino. That was a was that intended? Tell me about that.
So I think there are many different ways and entry points. Docker is one way, because you're going to be a developer at some point that wants to build and be able to host this locally on local hosts.
Mhm.
But then there are others out there that probably aren't developers, and maybe they want to take the path of learning Linux instead. Running Linux as an operating system as your daily driver is just going to teach you a number of interesting things about how systems work. And then you begin to take that model and apply it at scale, and you're kind of now doing DevOps and not really knowing it. But there's another path. Like, I encourage folks to maybe even think about networking, because that's really where it started for me. Like, I dove right into networking almost 20 years ago. And for me, it was really about how packets flow, like where packets go, where they start, how they're constructed. And at the end of the day, like, when you think about an application and how it communicates, it's all packets behind the scenes that make this possible. But my recommendation to folks is consider things like Linux. Start learning Linux, start being comfortable at the command line, and even then gravitate towards networking, because networking, although it's extremely important, I think most people can get by not having to know that level of depth that I have. They can get by just having basic network understanding, and they'll learn that through Linux operating systems or by working with Linux operating systems. And then they'll learn how to work with containers too, and then that'll navigate them to learning and working with Docker as well. You're muted, Jason.
2025 is the year of the Linux desktop, Michael said. So I think that's great advice. Pradumna, did you have something to add to that?
No, no, I think Marino covered that Linux thing because I think that teaches a lot of things. Every tooling like you use is based on like kind of Linux. And interesting thing about the Docker, it itself contains like a namespace thing which comes from the Linux itself. So it make a lot of sense to learn about Linux because a lot of tooling and everything works around that only. So yeah, great advice from Marino.
Nice. Um, Marino, you had kind of mentioned, like I said, I wanted to touch on a few things that you had spoke about, specifically like automate. Wow, jeez, I can't talk today. Um, Automating tasks and processes and stuff like that. How how important has that become to the role of DevOps at this point? Like, is that something that is almost a prerequisite that you should know base and have a basic understanding of?
Very much so. Automation is built into a lot of things we do today, and we don't even see it. But I'll give you an example. Like right now, I'm working with a customer to do some implementation, and the thing that we don't want to be sitting there doing is click, 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 write scripts, deploy configs. We want something to do that for us, especially in a very repeatable sense. And so this notion, this concept of continuous integration and continuous deployment is what really drives and ties that automation together in various different ways. In fact, the idea of DevOps or idea behind it is CI/CD. You need a system to be able to continuously integrate and then continuously deploy in a very cyclical manner.
Interesting. How would you approach automation for maybe companies or again even people that haven't transitioned to that?
Is that a question for me?
For anybody, it's just open. It's open. Whoops, I
So
hit the wrong one there.
So in order for that to occur, for a company to really get behind automation and be one with it, they have to understand the business reasoning behind it. They have to understand what they gain by automating processes. A lot of people think like, oh my gosh, I'm going to automate myself out of a job. As much of a joke as it sounds, it's actually not a joke because it's not a reality of folks losing their jobs because of automation. Automation saves you a lot of human prone error. Like if someone mistypes something or misconfigures something because they did it by hand, that can lead to an outage. But if you can automate the process, test it out, and then make that repeatable to deploy into production, you cut back on those errors and outages altogether. So that's like a primary business driver for it too. But it also means that that individual, that engineer is freed up to be able to do other things too, to solve other problems, higher level problems, deeper problems, problems that they maybe decided to sweep under the rug and now they can revisit them all over again. But it just removes that, um, what's the word, monotony of doing the
Hmm.
same thing over and over and over again.
Nice. Pradumna, did you have any feedback on that as well?
Yes, we say this word drive, do not repeat yourself. So I think when you are repeating anything, it's matter of automation. Like automation is needed. Like that is the bottom line. So for example, if your developer is like building a product, running the tests, pushing to the production. So developing is a part for a developer. Why to write? I mean, writing the test is fine. Why, but why is wasting like hours for just test to complete and like why to wait to get its green check mark on the production? That is a part of I would say automation thing. You just create a PR, you raise a PR, and every automation runs like either using GitLab CI or either using GitHub Action, doesn't matter. So if you're repeating yourself again and again for the repeat tasks, you need automation. Doesn't matter which company you come from. So yeah, that's my point on that.
I like that. I think anything that's repetitious should have some sort of a way to optimize that for sure. So I liked Michael had a question here. How do you feel? Do you feel like virtualization is still relevant? From his POV, it looks like it is, but his company makes monitoring software, so it's skewed. So yeah, interesting question. What do you got? What's your take on that?
Everything is still virtualized. Like everything is virtualization is a key primitive in a lot of cloud environments that you use today. A lot of developer environments, even like for example, you running Docker on your system is virtualization. The form is could be anything. It could be a container. It could be a virtual machine. But the thing is to be able to take a part of your operating system, its CPU, its memory, its disk, and then create like a separation or a little bit of a what's the word container, if you. I hate using the word container, but it is a container of sorts. It creates that isolation boundary by which you can actually run your application, by which you can isolate from the rest of your operating system. In the cloud, when we started using things like EC2 and GCP VMs, that was a start. But then every other subsequent service that you saw come out of those cloud providers was built on top of virtualization. They just hide a lot of that away from you, so you don't really see it. Good example of this is Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is a container orchestration system, and you could technically run it on bare metal, but that's a very deep conversation that we shouldn't get into right now. But you basically would run Kubernetes on a bunch of virtual machines on bare metal because you just have so much flexibility that way. You can destroy a virtual machine and spin up a new one if you want to. But and there we have Roxy saying Kubernetes. But yeah, I mean, virtualization isn't really going anywhere anytime soon. People still need it to do a variety of different things as well.
So follow up, would that be something worth learning through stuff like Cisco DevNet, etc.? Do you have maybe any specific resources that people can kind of reference to get more information?
That's a tough one because I honestly don't know what DevNet teaches today with respect to virtualization. I'm sure that they've very much expanded to accommodate for like containers and VMs and stuff. I just don't know the depth that they go in. A long time ago, you might have heard of a company called VMware. And VMware, I worked for them for a bit. They had excellent training and education on how to do virtualization. Today, if you wanted to go down that path, Red Hat has something called OpenStack, which allows you to also learn virtualization as well. And it's a little bit more difficult because as if you dive into the world of Red Hat, you really need to understand Linux. VMware, on the other hand, took away some of that complexity, so you didn't have to really deeply understand Linux or the Unix operating system, but you can get by. In the cloud, you'll probably best learn virtualization, except the thing that you won't be doing a lot of is like tinkering around with virtual machine files or resizing disks a lot or messing around with CPU and memory. You'll assign it and then you'll realize it's just too much work to upsize this device or this VM, blow it away and start fresh again, because that's what we've gotten to the point of. Like we just discard things now because it's so easy. We store state elsewhere and then we just redeploy with a larger set of resources.
Speaking of, I guess, resources, that kind of makes me think about something you were talking about a little bit earlier too, as far as like environmental impact and just throwing things away and how those things are allocated. How is the practice as far as like from the DevOps area? How are you being cognizant of that and maybe working on reducing environmental impact, just, like cloud costs or resources, stuff like that?
I think probably okay, I won't answer. I'll let Pradumna answer because I have so many thoughts about this. You'll have to go off
Oh,
of mute, my friend.
that looked like you made a really good point, though.
I was going to add something on the virtual thing.
Oh yeah.
Virtualization. So I was saying like I will give example of like Docker desktop, which we use on Mac OS. So it use hypervisor. It's a virtual machine virtualization frame. Another thing I want to say, like a lot of people do DevOps on Windows, so they kind of do virtualization to install a Ubuntu or like some kind of like Linux system and do like DevOps stuff. So virtualization is not going any cloud provider, any GCP, AWS. You see like uh, a lot of machines are VMs only. So yeah, so that was I was going to that. And thing about like the about the environmental impact, I think a lot of built-in things are there as well in the Kubernetes ecosystem. I would say I'm taking Kubernetes as an example because due to upscaling, downscaling, I think this kind of stuff. Plus, we have a lot of tooling around that, like cube cost, and there are a lot of tools which help you save cloud costs as well, depending on how you structure your configuration. So there are a lot of tooling. And interesting thing about this, I think from my perspective, the way DevOps work, it's if you are like managing the cloud well, it saves your cost in a very good way because it has upscaling, downscaling capabilities, which does not come with the normal machines. You are like, might be you need 5 gigs of CPU, but you're consuming like having a machine of 15 gigs of CPU. So a lot of stuff which has been inbuilt, but and there are lots of tooling as well. I mentioned like kubectl and a lot of where you can look at monitor the cloud with the cause. You can monitor your what is the database, a lot of things. So, yeah.
Nice. Go ahead, Marino.
I think one of the mistakes that I've made a lot of is just turning on a VM and forgetting about it. Basic hygiene when operating with virtual machines is just turn it off when you don't need it anymore and store your state somewhere so you can automate the reprovisioning of that state all over again. But Pradumna is right. Like there are tools out there that help you monitor your costs across like using virtualization, cloud, different things as well. But then there's the other side to it too, right? Like you could be using all of these tools for the sake of saving money. But what a lot of people like forget too is that you need to think about the security side of it too. So I'm talking through a particular situation with one of my customers around rate limiting. So I'll give you a good example. Rate limiting allows you to prevent an overusage of an API. But if you have scaling turned on the back end of your systems, of your VMs or containers, what ends up happening is if you don't have a rate limit put in place, a denial of service attack comes in, or a distributed denial of service attack comes in. So you have like all of these people, all of these systems, bots maybe making calls to this API. And then on the back end, it's triggering a scale up. Now you scale up infinitely, which means you have all of these containers or VMs running, which then means you're consuming more CPU and memory, which then means you're consuming more cloud or whatever your environment is. Or now you're causing unavailability issues for other systems because you're starving other systems from having that access to CPU and memory. So on one side, like, yes, you absolutely need to pay close attention to turning down resources when you're not using them, but you also have to implement security guardrails so that you don't end up with like $1 million AWS bill or Google Cloud bill, because it's happened before.
I've seen them. Everybody always likes to post that one. Definitely. Oh, wow. Yeah, I can imagine. Michael had another interesting question here. What's the overlap between DevOps and network automation, specifically referencing Cisco, Meraki, Catalyst, SDN, etc.?
I think Michael knows who exactly, like he knows my background very well. So he probably is asking these questions to trip me up. So let me kind of break down that statement. Can you bring that question up for a second?
Yeah.
Okay. So network automation is the ability to use tooling like Python to be able to automate the way you configure your networks, subnets, VLANs, firewall rules, etc. Now, what's interesting is, yes, we can do that. We can build it manually. We can build Python scripts. Check out something called PyATS, PyATS, and that'll give you a good understanding of how network automation works or how you can automate your network. But these particular vendors and technologies like Cisco Meraki is Cisco's SD-WAN / wireless solution. And then you have SD-WAN, which is like network automation, but for the WAN, and something like I used to do a long time ago, which kind of is funny because we still see it in some ways today. SD-WAN, software-defined wide area networking, is basically the ability to connect multiple islands together. I'm an island. My office is an island, right? Your office is an island. The cloud is an island, a big one, of course, right? But we need to find a way that makes it very fluid for these systems to interact. So no one wants to sit there and configure something called IPsec VPNs because it's a lot of handwork. Now you've automated that. That's what SD-WAN is doing. SD-WAN just automates the provisioning of these IPsec tunnels, these tunnels that connect your island to my island, and my island to Pradumna's island, to Roxy's island, to Michael's island, to whoever else's island, provided that we've got the right systems in place. If anyone that's wanting to like mess around with SD-WAN, check out something like Tailscale or WireGuard even. It'll give you a good idea of how to really play with SD-WAN technologies without having to, invest so much money into these expensive technologies.
This sounds like there's a lot of facets to a role like DevOps specifically. Do you think that, and maybe this has already happened, or maybe they've tried it before, that there'll be some sort of splintering more into specialized roles like DevSec or Cloud Ops, or maybe shift more toward a broad, kind of a full cycle engineering role idea? Do you see that happening? Has it already happened? What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Pradumna. I'm gonna sit this one out and then I'll answer.
Yeah, so I think you are correct. Like for example, I think it also boils down to on what side companies focusing. For example, if you heard about that DevSecOps things where you have a lot focus on security side of things, and we heard this a lot of we heard this term a lot like in past couple of years. So for sure, like I think I say it's still DevOps, but the specific one area get focused a lot. Like for example, if someone is doing the DevOps and he's paying too much attention towards the security things, like saying the, I said there's a infinity cycle, but he's like looking out more on the security side of things. So it's a like DevSecOps. It's more like companies preferring security in each step of like DevOps cycle. In general practice, we don't do that. It is good practice, but we don't do that. But when we talk about DevSecOps, like security comes first in that phase. I recently gave a talk on that as well. So yeah, so it's more like that thing. So it is for sure happening. So yeah.
So we're kind of seeing a little bit of a pendulum swing where we'll see a little bit of siloing going on to we're seeing generalists. Actually, I'll tell you, we started with generalists. Well, I started with generalization of tech in that I was a sysadmin that pretty much did everything from standing up servers to deploying the network to actually fixing computers and laptops and even imaging workload environments. And that broke down as you started to scale as a company. Large organizations can't have like a team of 100 sysadmins. It makes absolutely no sense. So they have to break them down into different teams where you have network engineers and you have DevOps engineers, and then you also have security engineers, and they focus in on the different bits and pieces. But here becomes a problem. What ends up happening is a ton of different siloing goes on, where network teams will push out network code and stand up new network environments. DevOps teams might stand up cloud environments or Kubernetes or containerized environments without talking to network teams. Then you have security teams off to the side, not having a single clue what the heck's going on until a breach occurs. And so through this collaboration capability, now folks need to really check in their process into Git or some similar tool where, like Pradumna mentioned, we need to file a PR before this gets merged and infrastructure gets deployed, because several people have to review that and then approve it. But here's the thing, like in order to properly address that, this ideology of platform engineering came about, where it's a bit of a practice, but also leans on an individual that effectively comes about and knows a little bit about everything and has the awareness and insight to be able to make the right calls and hit that approve on that PR, but also will engage with the security teams, engage with the network teams, engage with the cloud teams and say, hey, we're trying to do this. Here's why we're trying to do this, because there's a business element to it. And here's the impact when we actually do something, positive and negative. So we need stakeholder approval before we can actually hit that approve button. But that's what we've evolved to. We have now platform engineers that go out, have this great level of expertise across these different domains, but don't do everything. They lean into other teams. They lean into other expertise to be able to accomplish these goals, but state the goals that need to be accomplished.
Wow. I like that. That was not okay. Okay. I did post. I don't know if you saw that. I checked out the Tux Care. Um, it looks like an interesting. Are you able to see that in there? I'm wondering, as far as like other products like this, what have you guys seen work? Like, do you have any experience with something similar? Like, what is this replacing or setting out to do uh, for a company? Because I'm not super familiar. So again, I would definitely lean on you guys to kind of explain this to us.
So I'm looking at the website now.
Yeah.
It's oh, there you just pasted it.
Yeah, I
Eliminate
did.
unnecessary. You know, there are so many different systems and tools out there that probably do the exact same thing
Mm,
or are called something else, right? Maybe TuxCare shows up in certain communities and domains that haven't shown up elsewhere. And that's why like Lawrence was very familiar with it because I personally have never heard of TuxCare. I might have like maybe heard the word at one point, but I didn't pay much attention to it or think deeply about it. But it's effectively doing what I just described.
mm-hmm.
It's calling out when you have images that need to be patched because there are vulnerabilities in them, or you're lacking a piece of automation somewhere and you need to address that. Here it says eliminate unnecessary reboots and manual patching of workflows. DevOps engineers do this a lot by hand. There are systems that they will codify to make this possible as well. And TuxCare is just a more specific implementation of all of that too, because in a lot of ways, like organizations will move towards systems, solutions that will do this holistically, which will cover like a wide area of technologies and disciplines so that all someone needs to do is have that like knowledge and then press a button.
Hmm. Obviously, this is probably a newer tool, so I'm wondering like, is this replacing a tool? Like, what tools do you see this replacing as far as in your workflow? Because you otherwise would be doing this manually, or are you using other products or platforms to achieve similar results? Like, how would this ultimately benefit if you've got to like kind of relearn or reprogram something if you already have a product in place doing it? And would
So
that
what
be
I,
efficient? Would that even be an efficient thing to consider?
so I'm looking at TuxCare competitors just to see if I can find something that is relatable, but
I
I
just have
can't.
a thought. Sorry.
Go ahead, Pradumna.
No, I was saying, Marino said very good thing like that hits me. Like it's like I think like I will give you one more example. So we as a DevOps people like write configuration files which deploy to the Kubernetes cluster XYZ, correct? And there are a lot of platforms which provide you this as managed kind of thing where you don't need to like write the configuration file. You just hit click couple of buttons from the UI. That's it. You are even you're a developer, you can still deploy to Kubernetes. So it's more like a that is solution. It's more like if I am a DevOps person, might not be the right product for me, but for other people might be a great fit because they don't need to like configuration for the infrastructure, not for the automation, not for the security patches. We do like finding the CVs, trying to pass the what to say image file XYZ. I think this is doing a lot of things. Like platform is like giving us a service, so it's more like that. I think like I would say it's not matter of replacing a tool or adding that tool to a bucket. It's more like different tools are for different people. So as I mentioned, like managed Kubernetes service is more from you. It's a more a developer one rather for a DevOps person because DevOps person like to write everything by their hand or like any tool, but everything as an infrastructure kind of thing. They need like more gist of that thing or more control over those things. Yeah, that's was my take on this. Yeah.
Nice, nice point. I appreciate that, Marino. What were you thinking there when you looked those up?
I honestly don't recognize any of these companies, to be honest. And it's probably because I don't spend a lot of time in the security space or that depth of security. I probably know a friend who probably has this level of depth, and I could just go to them. And that's the other side too. Like when you're in technology, you're never going to know everything. I don't know everything, so I don't know what the hell. Okay, Michael just said, "What is even DevSec Net AI Ops?" And that's probably what TuxCare is. exactly just that acronym or word kludge that you see there. Where is
Yeah.
Heather, by the way?
I messaged her on LinkedIn too. I was like, hey, because I don't know if she checks Twitter that often. So I was like, okay, well, I'll message her there. I sent the follow up email. Hopefully everything's okay. I'm sure she just got sidetracked. She just doesn't like us guys. I think that's really what it is, what it comes down to. Yeah, I mean that's kind of bringing up again like these tools and everything when companies are, I guess, kind of maybe considering like a DevOps team or like scaling up or even like maybe forming that for themselves. Like what are some of the pitfalls that companies can avoid when they're maybe considering like again bringing on a DevOps team to manage some of this stuff or moving somebody from a team to do that? Are there like again consideration for tooling and stuff like that? Like I guess maybe what would be some of the steps for early adopters in a company for DevOps?
Are you waiting on me?
either it's just an open
So
floor. I can't answer, I know that.
I'll tell you something. One thing that a lot of organizations have been disillusioned into believing is that they need to like stand up infrastructure right when they start a company. And that's probably the biggest mistake I think organizations, like startups especially, make. What they have to gravitate towards is getting a product out there in the most least friction manner possible. What that means is use a managed service for now. Start with a managed service. And then when you begin to realize that you need a lot more customization and control, well, you've already got your service out there, it's running, it's doing a bunch of things, it's generating revenue. You start building a team who can start to think about how we can scale this in a different way where you can add in some of your own customization. And you bring in specialists, right? And it usually will start with that one person who's having to take it on to begin with. They'll be like, I need someone who is almost a copy of me, who's got these specialties. And then it just grows from there, where to the point you start using a big cloud provider like Azure, for example, or maybe you might be using Azure plus Sivo Cloud, and you run all of your production workloads in Azure while you're doing your testing and development in Sivo. And what that just means is now you have someone that is your cloud ops person. You have someone that understands and manages your CI/CD systems, your DevOps, and then you have someone that manages the security aspect of it. So they do the audits, they make sure that things are locked down, the right access is in place. People don't have access to systems they don't need access to. And then you also have a person that's an architect that sees it all, doesn't know all the nitty gritty, but understands how it all works. That's kind of what I do. Like I'm an architect and I work with end users to basically see the bigger picture. And then like they're the ones that go out and like start doing the finer detail stuff. But that's when you start to become a larger company. If you think about it, a long time ago when companies first started out, they'd buy a server and then deploy all of their code to that single server. And then they begin to realize like, oh crap, we can't just have a single server because if it falls over, and it did fall over previously, we need redundancy. So we have a second server. We need someone to manage that scale. We need someone to manage that redundancy for us. Michael's like, I am the architect. I created the matrix. I've been waiting for you. That's so true. Like when you think about the Matrix in the movie, the architect is effectively someone that sees everything at a very high level, knows like the inner workings of stuff, but doesn't sit there and programs all day or develops or writes code. Maybe they might get involved here and there if they absolutely need to, but they see things at a higher level because they also have to take that to the business and say, here's why you're doing this. Here's what benefits you have to gain by using a managed service like Aurora DB over like managing your own Postgres SQL server or something like that. Perfect example of why you would do something, because you don't want to take on the ownership of infrastructure operations of your database.
Right on. Any follow up, Pradumna, on that? You think?
I would say one line like You asked like when companies start like practicing DevOps, like DevOps tools or something. I think when you hit the bottlenecks, I think this is the time when you start looking into solutions. So like you are running a single monolithic service and you have your server got DDoS attack or something like a user not able to access your service. Then you start thinking about option, how to scale that thing or how to package that thing. Then you start exploring tools. Then you think, okay, DevOps is the right set path. So you containerize your application, ship to Kubernetes, and I think that does not stop there. You start looking into more tools like to make your services more scalable. You start looking more tools to like make it much more secure. Then you start comparing with same tool but different sets of features. Then you like try switching different tools. So it's like ongoing process. You keep improving, like implementing different tools. So yeah, just start with a bottleneck. To be honest, like either you hit with like what to say is upscaling, downscaling, or some attacks or something like that. So yeah.
Nice. That definitely makes sense. I see a comment here from Jeff. My DevOps team can never answer that question. Why are we doing this? Is always answered with I don't know. Well, maybe coming from a DevOps perspective, like how should people approach the teams when they are asking questions? Like maybe it's a matter of the communication of how the question's being asked. Like I don't know. I would see this if I worked in a specific area and be like, well, what's the underlying thing here? Or maybe this is just an underqualified department here. How would you better handle this situation if you were his DevOps team? Pradumna, go ahead.
Seriously, I don't have a lot of answers, but I think Marino can answer this for sure very well. But one thing I would say, like uh, recently seen this that trend in the industry, like if other companies are doing, we should also do the Kubernetes. So I think sometimes this comes from that a place as well, like your tech leads saw a company running everything on Kubernetes, and you want it, even though you don't like everything works fine with the monolithic structure, you still go for like microservices, transform everything, like rewrite the code. Took 6 months and transform to that thing. So
Mm,
it's if I first hear this question, I think uh, if someone is asking why we are doing this, so I think they are not in the right spot because might be they just transition because they want to. It's not matter of they wanted to. So I think, but yeah, I think Marino can add much better than me, so, yeah, for sure.
So Heather C mentioned or put a comment exactly,
mm-hmm.
right? The business objectives are probably the most critical drivers for why someone would do something. And sometimes people don't think business, they think tech right away. Like, oh, I'm doing this because I need to use a certificate authority because we don't want to use built-in Cs. Why don't you want to use built-in Cs? Well, obviously it's insecure. Why is it insecure? What actually, what are the implications of something like that? Well, let me tell you, if you decide to use a built-in CA, you're trusting the software that you're using to actually be that system of trust. If for some reason it gets compromised and not, the external system that you should be using doesn't get compromised, but your built-in does. Well, from a business standpoint, that could mean an outage. It could mean a loss of revenue. It could mean something like a situation where what's the term where your crypto locked out or something like that, where everything suddenly is encrypted and now you either have two options. You either have to restore from backup or you have to pay the fine and then they'll give you the encryption or decryption key, I should say. That happens quite often. And sometimes, companies may not have the right resources to be able to just sit there and recover from backup. So they have to pay the fine. But that's a valid business reason as to why you would do something like use an external CA or a certificate authority instead of something built in. So a business objective, business justification goes hand in hand with every sort of tech decision you make. Here's another example. Why would I have two copies of Kubernetes clusters out there, one in US East 1 and one in US East 2? Well, if one of them goes down, your business isn't tanking because it'll still be available to end users that consume your SaaS service. Or maybe the mobile app that you're using needs to connect into it. And if it suddenly starts timing out, well, that's a problem. People can't, make their trades on Robinhood or something like that. as an example. So there are business reasons behind everything. At the end of the day, every tech decision is a business decision as well.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, you kind of touched on it right there with CAs, but I wanted to ask like how DevOps aligns like practice wise with like I don't know HIPAA or like really strict compliance frameworks, GDPR stuff like that. Since you were just sort of touching on it there.
Yeah, so GDPR, HIPAA, PIPEDA, any sort of personally identifiable information has to be protected. Only because you as a business, you are basically safeguarding these resources for your end user, your end consumer. Now, think of it from a business standpoint. If all that data got leaked out, you've suddenly lost credibility, which means people will start unsubscribing from your service, which means loss of revenue, which means if you're a public company, your stock price is going to tank, and then your shareholders are going to be pretty upset. Your board of directors are going to go to your CEO and probably oust them because they made a bad business decision. And there are implications for why you need to think through a security strategy of ensuring that you protect PII. GDPR is something a little bit different because you're actually ensuring that your organization adheres to GDPR standards. I can't think of what GDPR stands for, but it's something the EU came up with so that anytime you share information with a company and you're based in the EU, European Union, they can't sell your data. They can't take that data and give it to anyone else in any shape or form without your consent. And if they do, well, okay, the General Data Protection Regulation, thank you so much. And if they do, well, the business is going to, face a serious fine, or they'll have to go through some, legal challenges and go to court, and then litigation comes up. Like a lot of this stuff happens on the daily that a lot of us don't even see it happening. Here's a good example. When you go to a conference, or if you organize a conference, tech conference, whatever conference, and you have people coming in from the EU, right, to attend your conference, and you have a list of their information, you can't share that with anyone without their consent, or you get fined as a conference.
Wow. That's a really good example, and it makes you wonder. It's like who at the top level who's maybe coordinating some of these things takes that into consideration. I never would have thought of that if you hadn't mentioned that. So good to know. Good to know. Pradumna, any insight on that?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it doesn't matter either you're using DevOps or anything. I think it matters of policies like you are making in the company. For sure, like you're using DevOps as a more like a, I told you practice or something. It's not specific to DevOps, correct? Even though you're running a monolithic thing, or you still need to follow that practice. So it's not like something which is only related like GDPR thing. We also have a like a product in Eddie Hub, like which used to have this regulation thing, so you can't like the thing was we were storing the data in the database and they have a lot of regulations. So yeah, it's even though we are running on the first we were running on the like basic Vercel, we had the same policy, then we shifted to like CVO managed service. We have the same policy because doesn't matter, uh, the application is serving the same thing and you have to manage the data in the same way. So yeah.
Whose responsibility ultimately is this to ensure? Is this something that sort of falls at the hand of the DevOps personnel team? Like who ultimately is going to be the one that essentially gets the axe if something does happen?
It's not so much someone getting the axe. It's just, you'll have a legal team, you'll have a compliance and regulation team, and then even a security team who are all working together to really ensure that one, the standards are set, two, the standards are being followed, and three, audits are in place to ensure that any sort of changes that take place are communicated across the board to all different teams. Now, DevOps might be somewhere in there. DevOps teams might be in there to actually implement certain technologies. Like, for example, you'll find a DevOps engineer implementing an API gateway with a plugin that redacts sensitive information or redacts credit card information, right? So anytime an API request comes in with credit card info, that can't be stored it can be used for a short-lived action, but then that data has to just disappear. It can't be stored anywhere. And that's the responsibility of multiple people, not just a single individual or single team.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We've got about 5 minutes left here. You guys have given us just an absolute wealth of information here and insight. I mean, there's so many things that you guys brought up that I hadn't even really considered. Did have a few more questions. Then again, I wanted to just shout out the audience. Thank you guys so much, everybody, for being here. And I think both of you excel at all of these things, by the way. What non-technical skills do you think are most undervalued in DevOps? Because it seems like you're doing a lot more than just like, building out servers or setting up Docker containers. It involves a lot, like leadership, communication, just
It's straight up those two. Like literally, communication is probably the forefront of it all. You can be the smartest engineer that knows how to write like Python and JavaScript and whatever, but if you can't communicate, that's going to be a big problem, especially in a large organization. You have to be able to be upfront about blockers, challenges. You have to be able to willing to state your needs to be able to move forward. You have to be willing to engage with other teams as well and have them provide input. Can't just keep it all to yourself, because that's how siloing begins. So yes, it doesn't necessarily mean I've got to pick up the phone and call every single person out there, but communication comes in the form of the systems you use for collab, right? Whether it's Slack or Teams or Discord, even whatever it is, in addition to emailing, in addition to using tools like Git and GitHub and GitLab. I see a comment from Heather here, especially with the influence of AI environments, communication between business layers is where you stay relevant. That's 100%, 110% true.
I like that. I'm screenshotting that one, actually, Heather. I'm stealing that. That was a good one. Nicely said. Pradumna, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that one?
I think Marino covered everything. I think first keeping your ego and knowledge side and hearing to the pain points of the developers and the other teams, because that is your job, like to fix a pain point. And if you're not hearing the pain points, doesn't matter like how much experience you come with. But just want to answer one question very quickly. I see there's a question about DevSecOps, which I mentioned previously. So just want to the difference, a very quick difference is thinking the security first in every step of DevOps. So for example, there was a pain point, like you push emails to the registry or something like that, and then you encounter a bug, or sorry, a CV, then this whole code need to be rewritten. So in the DevSecOps, you just prioritize security in every step. So you have a kind of security guard in every step, so that if you hit a security bottleneck, you fix that thing there, and it will not whole cycle from testing, pushing to registry, production, XYZ. So it's more like security first in that thing. So yeah, that's what gist of that thing.
Nice. Great response. Thank you for the question too, Jimena. Shout out to Jimena, who is my teammate over at torc.dev. Great question. Last question. What is the biggest misconception about DevOps that you would like to clear up? This one's to both of you, so you pick who goes first. Pradumna it is.
It's really hard to answer, but I would say everyone don't need DevOps. I would say in a very short way, yeah. So another misconception is you have to learn so many tools to be a DevOps engineer. That is the biggest misconceptions. You don't need that. So we start with basic tools like Kubernetes, Docker, XYZ, and as the time passes, as our services, as a team needs different kind of tools, we introduce them, try out things, and make it work. So I think you need 30 tools to get started with DevOps. That is the biggest misconception. You can just start with day one, basically containerizing your application and trying to deploy it to a server. That's it, some remote hosted server. So I think that is also a part of DevOps. Yeah.
Nice. Marino, finish us off here.
I do agree a lot with what Pradumna said. Basically just stole my answer there. So no, but I think the biggest misconception, in my opinion, is the lack of understanding of the business need. So if you miss that, if you miss the business need, if you just go straight to Kubernetes, you've already lost the game.
Wow, there you go. I love that. What a relevant and like nice way to finish with such a powerful thing like that. If you are not being cognizant of what the business needs, you've already lost. Essentially, that's a soundbite too. Where was that? 50. We'll go to 59 minutes. I got to get that clip. Thank you again so much, Marino, Pradumna. Where can everybody see you? Shamelessly plug what you're working on right now. Where do you want people to connect with you? You got a newsletter, a blog, a video coming out. You speaking at an event. What you got, Marino? Hit us.
So you can find me on the Twitterverse, and at the same time, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you're more than happy to answer any kind of questions. I do a weekly live stream with Ned Bellavance on the intersection of like AI, Python, cloud technology, and just building, because it's been a while since I've actually been like the engineer that builds stuff. So go check that out. I do post across those different channels, so it won't be hard to find out when that is. It's unfortunately at the same time as when Jason does his live streams on Fridays. But if you're a little bored of Jason, come check us out. We'll be extra boring for you.
Which happens.
It's called Live Stream on Main. Check it out.
Awesome. Yeah. Everybody go connect with Marino. Tell him you met him here. Heather said thank you for all of the wonderful data that you guys gave today. That's fantastic. All right, Pradumna, you're up. What do you got? You're muted again.
Sorry. Shortcut does not work. So I'm saying like working more on the blog these days. So yeah, you can connect me on Twitter. So I am basically mostly like on Twitter. So yeah, anything like comes up, I will just share there. So yeah, that's from my side.
Love that. And Pradumna is looking for work. Confirm or deny?
Yeah, I do. I'm looking for the different roles. So, yeah.
Love that. Everybody in the listeners section, you have a very huge asset here for your company, or somebody that is looking for somebody like
Thank you for
Pradumna
that.
that is a rock star. Make sure you connect, get this man a job. Let's do it. All right. Thank you again so much. Make sure you head over to our Torc community page, head to the platform, sign up, head to the Discord, check out all the events coming up the rest of the week. Thank you again to Marino and Pradumna, my wonderful guests. Hopefully Heather's all right. We'll check in on her afterwards. But you guys stay backstage. I'm going to end this, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Jason, Pradumna. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.